Hey, it's Brian, and if you're listening in real time, I'd like to wish you a very happy National Poinsettia Day. That's December 12th. And if you've ever wondered how poinsettias became more or less the official Christmas flower, well, stay subscribed and keep listening because there's a whole episode dedicated to that very topic hitting your podcast feed in a few days. And with just under 2 weeks to the big day, we have plenty more backstories to your favorite Christmas traditions and Christmas memories from listeners just like you. But today is a little surprise episode, as I like to do when I have something special to share. I recently took a trip down memory lane with my new friend Mark Voger. He's the author of Holly Jolly, Celebrating Christmas Past in Pop Culture. I figured that's right up our alley here at Christmas Past, so I'm delighted to share our conversation here with you. Just a heads up that it was recorded over Zoom and, well, it sounds like it. But before we get into it, let me remind you that I would love to send you a handwritten Christmas card and an official Christmas Past sticker. All you have to do is rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and then reach out to me with your mailing address. Contact me at christmaspastpodcast@gmail.com for more. Let me also remind you that there's still time to share a Christmas memory to appear in an episode. If you've been listening to the season so far, you'll know that I pre-recorded most of my episodes months ago, and that all of the listener-submitted memories will appear in special compilation episodes like the one that came out on December 9th. Well, I'm just over the moon excited to let you know that there will be more episodes just like that between now and the big day. At least 2, but maybe as many as 4, and I want yours to be among them. All you have to do is record a voice memo into your phone and send it to christmaspastpodcast@gmail.com. Just keep it reasonably short, clean and family friendly, and be sure to say your name and where you're from. And finally, come on over to christmaspast.media and check out the definitive directory of Christmas podcasts. It's right there on the homepage, and it's a listing of about 180 Christmas podcasts. There's sure to be something new for you to liven up your Christmas playlist. Well, I'll come back at the end to wrap up and say goodbye, but for now, please enjoy my conversation with Mark Voger. Hello and welcome. It's yours truly, Brian Earl here, coming to you from the all-new Christmas Past headquarters in wonderful Willow Glen, California. You know, when it comes to Christmas, there are a lot of words people use to describe it, the warmth, the magic, but for someone like me and my guest today, nostalgia would rank high on that list as well. There's nothing that can create feelings of nostalgia quite like our favorite day of the year, and it happens to be the subject of an all-new book. I'm holding up a copy here called Holly Jolly, and I'm very happy to welcome the author of that book, Mark Voger. Welcome to Christmas Past.
Brian, thanks for having me. I hope I get invited back again sometime.
Oh, most certainly. I would imagine so, because there's so much to go through in this book. And this is, you know, what the kind of book that I grew up with around Christmas time. They'd always be on my coffee table. And I suppose that you could read it cover to cover, but you could also do it like I've been and just you flip open to any page and there's just really something interesting that you can sort of, you know, go back and forth. And almost every time you open the book, there's just something new and fun to hang out with for a little while. Why don't you tell us how this book came about?
Well, it's the third in a series of pop culture histories that I've done. The first one was called Monster Mash. It was about the monster craze of the 60s. And then the second was called Groovy, which was about psychedelia of the 60s into the early 70s. So this seemed like the next logical topic because I designed the books as well. So I'm trying for something visual, as you know, something like eye candy rich. And also just something, a rich topic that really permeated pop culture. And I can't think of a topic that inspired more media and than Christmas. There's Christmas movies and music and animation, food, stained glass windows, anything you can think of. Little Debbie's Christmas tree cakes. I mean, it's so much has sprung out of Christmas.
Well, I want to let everyone listening on the podcast know that if you'd like to see what I'm seeing, you can check this out as a video on YouTube. And for our YouTube watchers, if you just want to listen to it, that's fine too. You can find it on the main Christmas Past podcast feed. So for those on the audio only, I'll do my best to describe what the people who can see this are seeing. But what Mark has done is prepared 5, I guess we'll call them nostalgia triggers from the book that we're going to go through one by one. And so the first one is I'm going to open up to, it's right here on page 35 of the book, and that is the Babar cartoon. Babar is our Santa's helper. Now, Mark, Babar is one of those things that I'm familiar with. I'm sure I've encountered it at one point or another. It's just not something I grew up with, right? I think it's something I sort of discovered later on. So help me out here. What is, who was Babar and what is this special?
Well, Babar was of course a big cartoon elephant who was a king of a fictional country, and he was created by, the writer-artist was Jean de Brunhoff, but it was actually his wife, Cecile, who created the character. Very interesting origin story. She created it as a bedtime story that she told their two sons, Matthew and Laurent. And they loved it, and their father was an illustrator. So eventually the boys asked their father to illustrate the story. And it wound up turning out so well that Jean decided to make it into a children's book. And that came out way back in 1931, the first Babar story. And with the book that's Christmas related came out 10 years later in 1940, but he had been gone for 3 years. Jean de Brunel died in 1937, and what happened was he had done the Babar story, Babar and Father Christmas, for a newspaper, and he did it in black and white, just the ink drawings. Perhaps he did want to expand it into a book later, or actually do it as a book later, but he passed away, and so posthumously the coloring was added, and somebody did a very beautiful job, very faithful to Jean de Brunel's style, ink and then watercolors, or what appear to be watercolors to my untrained eye, and it's a sweet story, and Brian, sometimes I put myself in the mind of people back then, thinking there's never going to be another Babar book because Jean de Brunel passed away, and then just in time for Christmas, 3 years later, there's a Babar and Father Christmas book, and so it's like a Christmas miracle.
Mm-hmm. Do you happen to have a copy of the book for yourself?
Yes, I do. Not first edition, but I do have it. And because actually I have a very healthy collection of Christmas media, and but for Holly Jolly, I did get stuff just for it. Like the cover is from a 1958 comic book, and the back cover is a Bijou Santa Claus doll that I actually bought for that purpose. And yeah, I made sure and get Babar. And the reason I picked it for our nostalgia trigger, as you say, is because it's off the beaten path. As you say, like The Grinch by Dr. Seuss is much more familiar, mm-hmm. and of course, Golden Book's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. But and even even some of the other Golden books. But Babar is like a little more receded into the past, and I just thought it was a really sweet story.
And I noticed there are a lot of stories, or maybe not a lot, but several stories, at least from my experience, that are maybe aren't popular here in the States, right? Like I know in England, Raymond Briggs's The Snowman is just, that's like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer to them. Whereas here, it's more like a specialty interest. Is Babar, is it more of like a British thing or an American thing, or like where is that most popular?
I'm really not sure. Perhaps France. I mean, I'm really not that sure. But I do have. I'm older than you. I'm 62. I do have faint memories of seeing him around. Maybe other kids' houses. I know we didn't have a Babar book where we are, but it is true. If a book like Holly Jolly were done from the point of view of a Brit, it would be different. This is mostly an American view, mm-hmm. but there's a lot of Anglophilic geeking out. There's a lot of like Dickens, and a lot of like Christmas crackers. There's stuff in there that because a lot of our Christmas culture did come across. Like it went from Germany to England, and then at the turn of the century, the last century, it hopped the pond over here to the States.
Well, speaking of Americans, there is one American I'm thinking of without whom we couldn't imagine Christmas that we know today, and that, of course, is Bing Crosby. For those again, if you're listening, I'm opening up to this page here in the book where we're looking at the cover of Bing's Christmas album. Just a little aside, before I moved here to Willow Glen, which is a neighborhood of San Jose, I lived up in San Mateo, a little further up the Bay Area Peninsula. And if you go directly west, you hit a town called Hillsboro, which is where Bing Crosby lived and his estate still is. You can drive by and see it. It's actually kind of what you'd expect to find of someone who was a huge star in the 40s and 50s. And, you really just cannot get through Christmas without listening to White Christmas, without watching the movie, and so on and so forth. So let's just talk a little bit about Bing Crosby. You want to start with the album?
Oh, well, sure. The song itself, White Christmas, it still stands as the biggest Bing Crosby version as the biggest selling record. And he first sang it on Christmas Day in 1941 over the radio. And of course, that's December 1941, so it's only weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So a lot of Americans were thinking about having to go overseas to defend America, and so the lyric, just like the ones I used to know, was very resonant. And as the war dragged on, its popularity just kept renewing itself around Christmas time. And again, the boys were thinking of home. And I think what's interesting about that song and about Bing Crosby singing that song is that, well, he sang it more or less the rest of his career, but he sang it in a movie called Holiday Inn, which was his co-star was Fred Astaire. So there's the dream team. And no surprise here, but Fred Astaire played a dancer, Bing played a singer. But they both cross over to each other's comfort zones. But it's a real neat movie, and Bing sings White Christmas in it actually twice. And then but then the biggie was 1954, the VistaVision color big musical directed by Michael Curtiz, White Christmas, with Danny Kaye as Bing's cohort. And then the love interests were Rosemary Clooney, aunt of George Clooney, and Vera Ellen, she of the freakishly long legs, and she could do anything with them. She tapped with inhuman precision, and it's heartwarming. And then finally, when you get to the literally to the end of Bing's life, he sang that duet with David Bowie for television of Little Drummer Boy and Peace on Earth. And just the neat thing about that is he bridged generational gaps. He didn't have much time. He died a little more than a month later after playing golf. And so we did, and he did sing White Christmas in that special, not with Bowie, but he wrapped up that special with that one last version of White Christmas.
Mm. And I've been meaning to cover Bing Crosby. As a matter of fact, I've been trying to get in touch with his estate over in Hillsborough to get an interview. And one of the things I personally find interesting about him was that when he really was starting to become popular, a new kind of ribbon microphone was coming onto the market that allowed the singer to get very close to it and sing sort of a little bit lower. And that's part of his signature sound, that just smooth, mellow, relaxed sound wouldn't have been possible were it not for the microphone technology of the day. And so, you kind of think that singers making use of things like auto-tune and all of that is like a new thing, but it's been around for a really long time. And on Christmas Past, when I talk about backstories, I really like to get into those little nitty-gritty, surprising details. So maybe in a future season. One thing before we move on, and not to be a wet blanket, but whenever we mention Holiday Inn, I just need to let viewers know that it was
Absolutely.
a different time back then. There is one scene in it that just, it would not be appropriate for today's viewers. Google it, take it with a grain of salt. But I just kind of feel like if you've never seen the movie, I wouldn't want you to see it and then say, why didn't Brian warn me about that one scene?
Yes, and you're referring to the blackface sequence.
I am, yeah.
And it is offensive by today's standards, and there's so much of that. I mean, Judy Garland did it, and Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton. And even John Wayne and Jimmy Cagney did blackface scenes, and it's sad, and it's a regrettable aspect of classic movies.
Mm. Yep, and I was mentioning this to someone else the other day. One of the things I do during the off season is I'll narrate classic Christmas fiction, and a lot of the same stuff comes up. And the story will seem to be fine for like halfway through, and then all of a sudden there'll just be some choice language where you're like, okay, I guess we're moving on from that. That's just sort of what any area of history that you focus on, there's going to be those kinds of elements, and so I just try to help people navigate around them in the way that makes sense for them.
Right on, sure.
So let's move on to a movie that I've never seen before, but it's about someone I've heard of, and that's Santa Claus. So again, if you are watching, you can see, but if you are on the podcast only, I'm opening up to a page where I'm looking at a movie poster, and it's a movie poster of a movie called Santa Claus that was made in Mexico. So you're just going to have to help me out a lot on this one. Why don't you just dive in? Okay,
I highly recommend the Mexican Santa Claus. It came out in 1959. It is weird, and it's available. It was basically the way it started. I'll try to wrap it up, Brian, is it was sort of sort of almost false advertising. They almost advertised it like it was a Disney movie, an enchanted world of make believe. But it was like this brain twisting material. It was directed by the Mexicans. Did a lot of the Mexican studio, Azteca Films, did a lot of horror movies. And a director named Rene Cardona, one of my favorite directors, did Santa Claus. But he also did all these like wrestling people versus monsters, like, you know, Las Luchadoras contra la Momia, you know, so some of his horror sensibilities crept into Santa Claus. So there's a scene of hell, and there's devils wearing red robes. Actually, they're robes that almost look like KKK robes, only they're red, and they're walking through fire and brimstone. And the devil is commanding the devil is commanding a devil named Pitch to go to Earth and coerce the children into doing bad things. So it's, and then, you know, hilarity ensues. But it's so twisted. Santa Claus actually uses sleeping powder to make sure that the children stay asleep while he's doing his Christmas Eve deliveries. And instead of elves, his workforce are, it's like a sweat house, a sweat factory. It's children from all over the world that are, you know, helping to make toys for him, and it's just really weird and weird and wonderful. And if you have had like too much eggnog and cookies and your glucose levels are going kablooey, this is the perfect movie to watch.
Well, it sounds like it. And you said it's one of those things you can find on like YouTube or archive.org or someplace like that. Sure,
it's on YouTube, and like I said, it's charming. Just it's almost like if you like Plan 9 from Outer Space, you know, if you tend to like cult movies, Santa Claus, 1959.
Well, let's move on to movies that I have seen, and those are, of course, the several animated shorts that I kind of grew up with, and every now and then I'll go on YouTube and find one of those compilations. So again, if you're listening, I'm opening up to this page here that has a bunch of these animated shorts, like from Disney, Warner Brothers, and there are a lot of older ones that I'm not even sure who makes them. And I don't know if you're like me, one of the things that I always notice when I watch those old ones is just the quality of the animation, right? Like where each of those, like the frame rate was higher, the quality of the illustrations was higher. And I'm always surprised looking at it through modern eyes that like they figured all this stuff out like back in the 20s and 30s, like this really sophisticated animation stuff. And one of the first practical applications was to create Christmas content. So is there one in particular that you wanted to dive into?
Yeah, I thought I'd talk about the Fleischer Brothers 1936 short, Christmas Comes But Once a Year. Mm-hmm. And what's neat about that is everybody knows the Disney ones, you know, Toy Shop and the Donald Duck ones. But not as many people know the Fleischer material. But they're the guys that did the early Popeyes that you see sometimes that are black and white, and you just watch them and you're like, what is this? The Betty Boop cartoons and Coco the Clown, like just really weird stuff. Because these guys were, these guys were immigrants, and they started out in New York, went to Florida, and they were just their stuff is just weirder, like a little bit less. I don't want to say that it wasn't family friendly, although Betty Boop, you know, idled at fetishy, but Christmas Comes But Once a Year. You mentioned the animation, the growing more sophisticated. One of the Fleischers, one of the Fleischer brothers, Max, invented a revolutionary process called rotoscoping, and their first animated feature was Gulliver's Travels. It came out it was the second ever animated film after Disney's Snow White. And the Gulliver character was filmed by a real actor, and then they, the process is pretty complicated, but they basically kind of like drew over him, so that when you watch it, it looks so much more realistic, although it is still obviously drawn and animated. And there's a couple of instances of rotoscoping in Christmas Comes But Once a Year. When you first see the orphanage, it opens at this orphanage where kids are waking up all these babies are waking up on Christmas morning. There's no adult supervision, but there are Christmas presents, but they all fall apart one by one. So these kids are all bawling. But luckily, Professor Grampy happens to be traveling by, and he hears the cries of the children and goes in. So when they introduce that orphanage, it's really kind of breathtaking the way it just sort of rolls around, and then you see the front. Then at the very end, Professor Grampy has a Christmas tree that's rotating, and he turns off the lights, and they all sing to it. And again, it's rotoscoping, so it really has this weird, like, it's realistic, but it's cartoony at the same time kind of a look.
And I know exactly the scene that you're talking about. It's the opening shot where it almost looks like a crane shot where you're getting like this full like 3D, the camera's going around the building. And I remember the first time I saw that, this was maybe 10 years ago, I saw it on YouTube. I'm like, there's no way that like they drew, like how? Because it is, like you said, it's just so perfect. It's like one of these swooping like Steadicam kind of shots. And it just really sells it and just creates a sense of realism. And like, I'm always surprised that something like that was even possible when it was possible.
And when you see stuff today that is digitally perfected, I mean, I like the old stuff better because you can see that it's drawn, and you can wonder how did they do it, or even better yet, just get lost in it, you know. But when you're watching digital perfection, actually it becomes boring after a while.
Yeah, it's you kind of want to see the artist's hand just a little bit in there. You need to see like some of the flaws as well, just so that you see the brush strokes, you see the craftsmanship that went behind it, and of course, the plenty of craftsmanship that goes into today's animation, but it was just a different ball game back then. And speaking of old versus new, we'll finish off with our final nostalgia trigger. I'm opened up to a page where the Honeymooners Christmas episode. Honeymooners, of course, like the best sitcom of all time. I could watch that all day. There have been days where I have watched that all day. Used to be pretty prominent on Nick at Night. I remember as a teenager just staying up for hours and hours watching it. And so what that tells me, as someone who sort of grew up after that show was popular, that it's timeless. I mean, classic comedy is classic because it would work today. You could take those same situations, those same characters, put them in a modern setting, and it would still work, right? Because it is just basic bread and butter situation comedy. So let's talk about the Christmas. There's the one that came out on December 24th, 1955. And how about we just talk about the plot of this one?
Oh, thank you, Brian. Sure. Well, it's a gift-giving debacle. Ralph, we don't know this throughout the episode. It's revealed halfway through, but Ralph had saved up $22 to buy a really cool rockin' Christmas present for Alice, and he blew it on a bowling ball. So he gets her this little box made out of 2,000 matchsticks glued together. The guy who sold it to him said it was once owned by the Emperor of Japan. Typical Ralph Cramden screw up. And so he confesses this to Ed, and they have to figure out, how to save Christmas. But what's really neat about it is, it's got deception and near misses, and it's got slapstick when Ralph, accidentally puts his hand in, it's caught by a mousetrap. Self-reflection, regret, forgiveness. There's an O. Henry twist, but best of all, Brian, at the very end, and this should be on everybody's clip reel for Christmas, Jackie Gleason as Ralph Cramden gives a soliloquy about the spirit of Christmas. And the thing that always sticks in my head is that he says, the closer it gets to Christmas, the quieter it gets, and there might be snow falling. And then he says, on the streets of Bensonhurst in Brooklyn, if you knocked into somebody on a normal day, you say, hey, what's the matter with you? Whatever. But like on Christmas Eve, it's like, hey, how you doing, pal? Merry Christmas. Like everybody gets nicer. And he says, he doesn't say it's great to go home to a house where somebody loves you. He says, which is so sweet, even sweeter, it's great to go back home, and in that home, there's somebody that you're crazy about. Mm-hmm. So it's just heartwarming.
What a wonderful way to cap this episode off. The new book is Holly Jolly. And Mark, where can people find this?
Well, it's on the publisher's website, twomorrows.com, TWO Morrows. It's also on barnesandnoble.com, Target, Amazon, Walmart, just pretty much wherever books are sold online.
As they used to say in the commercials, wherever fine books are sold. So the book is Holly Jolly. It's brought me many hours of pleasure here at the Christmas Past headquarters, and I think it might for you as well. So be sure to pick up a copy for that. And be sure to check back on a future episode because, like Mark says, I have a feeling he's going to be coming back soon to talk about more of the content we find in Holly Jolly. And for those of you who are listening, you're not seeing what I'm seeing, which is a Humpty Dumpty coming into the shot. What's the story behind that?
Oh, he's just really cool. I think he's on my cover. Yeah, I stuck him on there, and he's a full page inside. So he's just really cool. You can always find weird Christmas stuff from a half century or more ago. It's great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mark Voger, thank you so much for joining me on Christmas Past, and a Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Thank you, Brian. Take care of yourself.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. And something I hope just as much is that your Christmas season is going wonderfully so far. Hey, drop me a line and let me know how it's going. You can get in touch anytime, and I sure wish you would because I love hearing from you. You can reach me anytime at christmaspastpodcast@gmail.com or connect on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you haven't yet joined the private Christmas Past Facebook group, come on by and do it today. We celebrate all year. If you're listening in real time, I'll be back with an all-new episode tomorrow. And just between you and me, this was my favorite one of the season to write. It's the backstory to one of your favorite Christmas traditions, and I'm excited to share it with you. Until then, let me remind you as always that Christmas Past is produced in wonderful Willow Glen, California by yours truly, Brian Earl. And please remember to stay safe and healthy, look out for one another, and may your days be merry and bright.